you for joining us today. And, you know, we've had a little bit of a challenge with getting our other speaker on. She's having some challenges, so she's going to keep trying. But we have Diana Henry here, and we're going to have a great presentation at any rate. So, yeah. I'd like to introduce Diana Henry to you, and just a little housekeeping. Some of you were asking, why you didn't have sound. You didn't have sound because we weren't on yet. So you'll just be able to use the chat box. Now, if at any time during the presentation we freeze or get kind of wonky, you can just refresh your browser. That's the easiest way. That happens sometimes. And if you are having any questions as we go along, could you please put them where it says ask a question rather than in the chat box. If you put them in the chat box, we don't see them. They just, as everybody starts chatting, they go away. And so if you want to ask a question at the end, Diana and I will be talking for about an hour. And if you want to ask a question at the end, you just put it right here, you type it in, and we'll be able to see and answer the questions. If you haven't taken the poll yet, click on polls, and we have 3 questions. Do you currently use the SPM or SPMP? How do you rate your knowledge of SPM or SPMP? And I added a 3rd one. Do you use quick tips? Diana, we didn't have that when we were doing our pre-interview yesterday, but I thought that's a good one to add. So yes, 6 say yes, 11 no, and we have 24 who are not sure. So yeah, they'll be sure by the end of this interview. So that's really good. So somebody says sound is choppy and sounds a little underwater. So if the sound is an issue, it's on your end. I hate to say that, but you need to be in Google Chrome in the latest browser. Is anybody else having trouble with sound? Let's just see if it's not a global. Is everybody okay? Can you check in? Who's here today? Sound is okay here. All right.
Good.
And it's recorded. And the nice thing about the sound is that even if it's kind of strange on your end, once it's recorded, it will sound perfect. So if you are having a hard time hearing it on your end, you can watch the recording and it will be just normal. So that's another option that you can do a little bit later. Okay. Oh, Roth says he's got it now. So thank you. That's good. Okay. And I should say, for those of you who are new, I'm Deborah M. Wilson, and I am a reading specialist, wannabe OT, love and adore the profession, and a collaborator. Collaboration coach is kind of my thing. Getting people to work together and share skill sets is my thing. And I'm also a parent of a child with special needs who is now 21. So I live this journey professionally, and I also live it personally. And my goal with these Think Different, jokingly, webinars is that what we're presenting today really helps you. And I think we get a little bit in education as a teacher. I'm speaking as a teacher. We get sort of like we're multitasking a lot. So I was talking to Diana and saying, looking at that one thing. And for me, the sensory processing measure and quick tips is if you've got one thing, one assessment, one tool that you're going to be using to really make your job easier, it would be this one. And that's what we're going to be talking about today with Diana Henry. And I'm going to read her bio to make sure I get it right.
Oh.
So Diana is the president of Henry Occupational Therapy Services. She studied sensory processing and sensory integration for over 40 years. She has written several tools books related to sensory strategies techniques, including the tool chest for teachers and students, tools for tots, toddlers, and preschoolers, and tools for teens. Diana is the author of the SPM Quick Tips and one of the co-authors of the SPMs and upcoming Lifespan SPM2 Infants Through Adults. She collaborated with me to include several school moves activities in the SPM Quick Tips. Thanks for including that, Diana, in your bio. That's sweet. Diana has also conducted research using the SPM Quick Tips with teachers, families, and therapists, including Dr. Gail Lindsay, whom she presented with at last year's American OT Association annual conference. So she's honored and happy to be here with us today. And so Gail is a phenomenal therapist in the Atlanta school district. So what we're going to do, I talked to Gail yesterday. We did our pre-interview. She hopped on camera. It was simple. We had no trouble at all. And for some reason today, her computer isn't letting her use her camera and her mic. So what we're going to do, because I really want you to be able to listen to Gail and see what all she's doing in the schools, is that I'm going to interview her. We'll see if we can get her on for next month's interview. So we'll just interview her separately. Diana's welcome to jump on again if she'd like. So hopefully we will have better luck with that. Like I said, we went through the process and everything seemed to work fine, but it's technology. So, we never know. And Diana's also a volunteer ranger. So she just came in from being a ranger. So her hair is in her braids. She's got her long, beautiful hair in her braids. And so she's also, you work with your husband, Ranger Rick.
Right. Exactly. Yes. So I just came off of doing one of my interpretive ranger programs. So I hopped home and quickly got in front of the computer. So
great. Thank you. And it's an honor to have you here. And people are saying, I'm going to look into those tools. So if you look at our call to action button, you will see Diana's website there. So I just put a link to it. And we'll do a follow-up tomorrow with everybody who's on the call. Any questions or any more resources, we'll send you a link to anything that comes up if you have questions or you wanted to see more information about something. So, all right. So Diana, we do have quite a few people who are you looking at the chat though? This should make you feel good. In capital letters, love tool chest, exclamation point. Katrina. Yeah,
I've seen some names I know, so it's really
cool. Hi, Jules Books. Hi, Diana. Yeah, you've got some pals on here.
Yes, you had said that they were all wonderful people, and it's really fun on a Friday afternoon to think that you guys would be on this. Just really blows me away, and I guess that's the passion and the commitment and the caring that you all have. So thank you so much for taking your Friday afternoon TGIF to come and spend with us. It's really an honor for me and an honor for me to be with Deb. So before we get started, I just want to thank Deb with all my heart, because she is an amazing person. I had a chance to meet at a workshop up in Oregon and connected with her, and we were kindred spirits, I think, in terms of our belief in collaboration. And that's my big belief system is collaboration. And so hopefully we can impart some information to you guys today that will help us all be better collaborators and move forward.
Yeah, and my collaboration was I saw it professionally, but also just personally. My daughter had the OT and the adaptive PE teacher and the reading specialist and special ed teacher and the speech person and the paper. They all were with her, but they all had separate goals. And, she has microcephaly, so she has the small brain that's, kind of challenged to really work through a lot of different expectations from different people. And that's when I started to see it. I started to see we need to be working together and each working at one goal, but doing it through our own skill sets in a way. So yeah, so for me you talked about your collaboration coming to you you want to share a little bit how you even came to see the importance of that collaboration piece?
Sure. So, and we'll get to the SPM from there.
Yeah.
But initially I had my clinic where parents would bring their kids for therapy, and it was great. I had all the equipment and the parents there, and it was wonderful. But it was actually the kids who said, Diana, will you come to my school and help the teacher understand why they can't take me out of recess? I need to move, or, why I fall out of my chair? Can you come and help? And so I went and I walked into the classroom, and immediately I went, oh my goodness, these teachers, they're amazing. And I think it's Oprah that says that next to parenting, teaching is the most honorable profession. And I really believe that. So I spent months actually in the school district of two of my kids that I was seeing privately. And then I contacted the American OT Association and said, we have to do things differently in the schools. We do certain things in the clinic. We have 45 minutes or an hour, really work the kids out. And then they go home and they poop out, they have snacks and all that. In school, it's really different. And plus in schools, we have the teachers. So that's when I started doing summer programs, tools for teachers, and little by little realized that if I could just impart a piece of the puzzle, the teachers could do great things. And the same thing with parents. So it's fun to speak with you all, because I know that there are many teachers, there are also many therapists, and there are parents on this webinar. And so that's really fun. That's how we all can learn and grow from sharing with each other. And so collaboration became it. And I realized that if I could learn the language of teachers, speak their language, and that I'd be a better communicator. And I learned so much from the teachers. And then that's really how the SPM came about. Some of you know Heather Miller-Kuhanik, who is one of the co-authors for that, came to me and said, you know, we have the different assessments for like the caregiver assessments, but we don't have really a school one. And we decided to do that. And for those of you that are not familiar with the SPM, it is a standardized rating behavior scale. And standardized by that, what I mean by that is that it's not—
Diana, hold on 1 second. I think Gail, I see her. Gail, are you here?
Yes, I am.
Okay, now I think I just have to, okay, come on. We have a black box. Hopefully we'll see your picture here in a sec.
I'm going to try one more thing.
Okay, well, we at least have your voice.
Hear you. How exciting.
Yeah. Well, Diane, I think you can keep going and explaining about, for those who don't know what the SPM is and the quick tips, let's explain that, and hopefully Gail can at least we have her voice, we can get the camera going.
Okay, so I mentioned that it was a standardized scale. In other words, it's not just like a checklist. And by standardized, I mean that when we develop the SPM for elementary schools, which is for 5 to 12-year-olds, kindergarten through 6th grade. We also have the preschool version, which is 2 to 5-year-olds, which also include for daycare. We had a question initially when we were developing it, the different items. One of them was does not like tags in their shirts. And we know that a lot of children who have sensory processing challenges don't like tags in their shirts. But what we found out when we went through the standardization process of having 1,000 typical kids, a lot being looked at, we found that, guess what? Typicals don't like tags in their shirts. So that item was removed from the sensory processing measure, leaving items there that are specifically for kids that have sensory processing challenges. And so that makes it a test that you can then use for research and also comparatively. So in the SPM, we have, for the elementary school, we have a home form, we have a teacher form, main classroom form, and then we also have art, music, PE, cafeteria, bus, and recess. And all these forms can be compared. And in the preschool, we have a home and a school form, and the school form can also be used for daycare. So the idea is looking at the children in different environments. And I think probably all of you know that in different environments, different sensory things bug us or help us. So, you know, I'm really different when I present, you know, at AOTA, you know, in April, I'll have all my hair all done up and everything. When I come home, I put on my PJs, or when I'm a ranger, I put my hair in braids because it's windy and it helps to not get in my way. And so this way, the SPM allows the teachers and the parents and the therapists to have a bird's eye view of how that child is functioning in the different environments. So we know, you know, some kids do really well, maybe in PE class, but they really bomb out in math, or they do beautifully in art, but they, you know, are having a struggle in the cafeteria. So this way, everybody can see where, not only where they're being challenged, but what are their strengths. So if they're doing really well in art, you can take all those things that are working in art by teaming and collaborating with all these people and having the art teacher say, oh yeah, you know, I have a little space for him because I realize that he needs a little bit more room than other kids. And other teachers can say, oh, well, maybe we can design an area in the classroom like that. So that's where the collaboration comes from. So it's kind of a roundabout way to say that I really believe in collaboration and empowerment. So it's not about us telling people what to do, but really sort of having conversations about, what seems to work to help support our kids.
So you have the sensory processing measure for elementary, and then you have the sensory processing measure -P for preschool. So you have a preschool forms as well.
Right.
A preschool form of it. Now the preschool form doesn't have all the other variable forms, right?
It just is it has two forms, the home and the school. And initially when we first developed it, we did have a recess form, but then we realized the person that goes out to recess in preschool is usually the teacher or the teacher aide who would be filling out that school form. So
Right.
what we did is we embedded recess and playground questions into the school form. And dress and bathroom and snack time. So we embedded them all in that one form.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I really like the preschool too. It's we're so informative. And if you I think one of the things that makes SPM so easy, and we're always looking at, easy things that don't add to our workload. And I think one of the things is talk a little bit about how you can digitally email and get the results. That's pretty cool. You've got that all set up.
Right. So both the SPM, and I'll talk about the quick tips in a little while, but the SPM and the SPM quick tips are available in paper form, but they're also available online on what we call a HIPAA secure platform. And in the medical world and also in the school world, you want to make sure everything is safe and can't be corrupted by someone else. As we now know, lots of things are being corrupted by other people. But anyway, so what happens is that the therapist would be emailing to the parent and the teacher, explaining, here is the form, just click on this link, and the link will take them to the platform directly. So you're not emailing the test, you're actually emailing the link to the platform where the form is. The parent or teacher fills it out, and I really hope Gail will be able to get on, because she uses it all the time in school, and she's always raving about how it's so great. It doesn't get lost in the backpack of the child. It doesn't get lost on the teacher's stack of papers. When people have it on email, many people can do it right away and send it right back. So you really, it makes things much easier and faster.
It's really affordable, isn't it, Diane? I don't know. I know we don't want to get so much into cost, but I mean, all of this is just so affordable.
Yeah, it's the same cost as a paper form. So I think it's over $1 a piece. You don't pay for the platform at all. It's the exact same cost as the paper. And the neat thing is that, at least for the therapist, if you send out all these forms and sometimes they never get filled out, well, you're out those forms. Here in the electronic version, you email the link to all these forms, and it's only when you score the report that you get charged. So I, on my platform right now, have many different tests out to PE, music, art, who haven't yet responded, and I'm not out those forms until they actually fill them out and I decide to score them. So
that's great. That's perfect too. I mean, it's just so, I know for $1, oh my goodness, all the information that you would get, it's just so worth. I mean, I know it's the best value around. And I think, and then your quick tips. So after they've scored this form, you don't leave them high and dry. You don't say, okay, now it's up to you to go scrounge and look and search and research and get on the web to figure out what to do about these different items. And Diane, I'll never forget when we were at that Oregon training, you were working on it, and we were all sitting at lunch, and we were all talking, and all these great ideas were coming out. And you're like, wait, let's write some of these down. I mean, so you actually just gathered a lot of wisdom from the community, your wisdom, and from different people. And I think that's what makes it so powerful, is that these ideas are coming from a lot of different perspectives and disciplines. And to take that and put it all together in this cohesive document that you created, just so much time and energy and work. But everything we do is how can we make our jobs easier? And I want everybody to know that they can, about quick tips and what they do next. So after they've scored it,
Right. And so I do want to give credit to people like you, Deb. And it was over a 9-year process as I traveled not only US, but internationally. And I see I have a colleague here from Denmark when I was in Denmark, and in all the countries that I traveled to before the quick tips were published, I would have lunch with Diana during our lunchtime at the workshops, and people would give ideas. And you're right, Deb, we had people, social workers, teachers, parents, physical therapists, I mean, all different, and people just gave ideas. And then what I did is I collected them, and I thought in my head, what are objectives that we have in the school, specifically in the school? And so, if you think of what therapists do in the schools, those of you that have worked with therapists or who are therapists, well, one thing is, you apply sensory input. So that's one of them, addressing the underlying deficit. So, we now know that deep pressure touch, which is one thing that Deb talks about all the time, can actually have a calming effect. So providing deep pressure touch via an activity, that would be addressing the underlying deficit. A second goal is that of teaching. So many of you, I can't imagine a therapist in the school or teacher in the school not teaching and informing and educating and helping people know that, for example, one tip would be, if a child is sensitive to touch, know that you have to approach them from the front and not in the back. Don't surprise them. You have to ask them permission to touch, and know that if they lash out, it's not that they're against you, but it's actually an automatic neurophysiological response. So that would be a teaching objective. The third one is to help this student be a self-advocate as soon as possible. And I was telling Deb yesterday that, we are now working on the SPM2, which will be from the baby, infants, all the way through adults. And she said, well, it's easy to have parents or adults be self-advocates, but what about a child? Or somebody was asking me that. Maybe it wasn't you. It was one of my adult clients, actually, a couple days. Sorry. Anyway, and I said, well, many of you have worked with 3-4-year-olds. You know that if they get overloaded, they'll run underneath the desk or underneath the beanbag chair or put their hands over their ears, trying to calm their system down. So giving them the tools to be a self-advocate as soon as possible, I think, is really powerful. I think all of us want to be a self-advocate and teach our students that. So that's the third objective. The fourth objective is what we and you all do so well, is adapt the environment, adapt the materials, adapt the activities. And I think I don't really need to give examples of that, like make the homework shorter or let them write a little bit less, or, put more a quiet little space in the classroom. The fifth objective is using social behavioral tools. So, I think that's used a lot in schools. If you get 3 done, then you get to, have a sticker. Obviously, I know a lot of times some of you might also work with the approach with autism, a behavioral, no, I can't, it just flipped my mind, but where, what is that? Autism, can't remember.
Is it a program, like a program that they're using?
Yes, a program for mostly with kids with autism that's very behavioral oriented.
Oh, the ABA.
Yes, ABA. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, ABA. So, so in the ABA approach, initially, I think a lot of people were saying for a child who needs a lot of movement, if you're good, yes, apply behavioral analysis. Thank you.
Yeah, we just jump in there, everybody. Help us out. It's collaboration.
Right. So initially, what would happen is they would say, well, a kid who needs to move a lot will say, if you do your homework, then you get to bounce on the ball. Well, through education and sharing came the understanding that no, these kids need to move. So if you want them to do the activity, writing or whatever it is, let them bounce on the ball, get that vestibular movement input in there that helps them to calm and ground and be alert and attentive, and then they can do their homework. So that's that collaborative piece. But so behavior
studies are showing, the studies, I have some studies that validate that when you integrate the vestibular while they're doing the academics, not before, not after, but while, as a reading specialist, I'm always looking at the academic piece. So while they're doing the reading and the academic piece, they actually learn much faster and rhythmic and learning through rhythm and as they're bouncing too. So it's pretty powerful stuff for the brain, the mind-body system.
Yeah, and working with speech therapists also about having movement as they're trying to do some vocalization.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, but there are behavioral approaches that, you know, help a kid if they do have, say, some sensitivity to touch, and their tendency is to lash out when somebody gets too close to them, is to be able to help them, to give them words, you know, I need a little more space. So it's a self-advocate, but it's also a behavioral thing. So we do use behavioral strategies. And so I wanted to include those in the quick tips. And then those were the 5 that we had for the SPM. So now with the SPM2, and we're developing the quick tips too. So if any of you are interested in helping out, we're going to give you that info. I added 2 more objectives. One is just learning new skills. And a lot of what Deb has to offer through her school moves is giving kids new skills. Doing a yoga program is a new skill to help calm the system. And then the last one, because in the SPM2, we have a lot of forms that compare. So for example, in the infants, those of you that are in early intervention, there's a form for the parent or the caregiver to fill out on the infant. And then there's also a form for the caregiver to fill out on themselves, so that you could look at the sensory preferences of that adult and of that infant and see if there's a goodness of fit. So for example, you have a parent that's very sensitive to sound and you have a baby that cries all the time. That's not a great fit. And so you want to have some tips, not just for the baby, but also for the parent.
Diana, I kind of a joke just real quick because it just fits in so well. So because I am auditorily defensive, like airports make me crazy. So when my 2 little kids were crying at the same time, I would look at them and say, the rule around here is only one child can cry at a time. And they would look at each other and they tried to decide who's going to stop crying. And it stopped the crying because they would like, oh, well, heck, who's going to be the one who gets to cry right now? And so it's kind of a
strategy. So you know what? I will add that on my forms. Remember to send that to me, and we will put that as one of the tips on the infant and caregiver form. But the same applies to teachers. I once had a little kindergartner who had a referral to come in, and he was certainly all over the place. There's no doubt about it, more than some of the other kids. But he also was a really big hugger. Well, the challenge was that it happened, the kindergarten teacher happened to be someone who needed a little bit more space, who really couldn't, you know, have all of this touching all the time. And so now with the new SPM2, there'll be the opportunity for the teacher not only to fill out on the child, but also on themselves and have that.
Oh my gosh, I love that. That is a fantastic idea, because so much of, like, even when I'm doing my workshops and I'm with the teachers and I'll say, some of this stuff is going to resonate and some are going to go, I'm not so sure about this, depending on your sensory system. And a friend of mine, she just said, you know, which I love, she says, our classrooms are just one big nervous system. And we're kind of trying to regulate this nervous system all day long. Right. And the more we know about ourselves, and I think that's where I run into some teachers who put up the walls, or some therapists that run into that with teachers. They'll say, well, the teacher doesn't want me in the classroom. And sometimes I'm not so sure if they don't want you, but they don't understand what you do. And they might have sensory needs that are like that. I don't really want the kids in my space, or I don't really want to move because I myself don't like moving very much. I've never been very grounded or balanced, or I have poor balance. So sometimes we take it personally that they don't want us in, but I think those forms would be really helpful, because once we understood each other and our sensory needs, I think we can communicate and collaborate so much more effectively and be respectful of that. You know, and I think that's why I focus a lot on the children. I tell the therapists, it's not about getting the teachers to do it, but if you can really focus more on the students kind of bring the teacher along. And if they realize the students can manage quite a bit of this, the teacher doesn't really have to manage it. And that's one of your goals that you talked about, was that self-advocacy and managing it. So yeah, it's just brilliant work. And all your dedication and time that you put into this and the research, we were talking about that yesterday. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I have to say, first of all, I stand on the shoulders of lots of amazing people before me. But second of all, I mean, you did also, and I bet every single person on this chat does amazing things in their own way. I wanted to say something about this thing about teacher therapist or teacher child differences, also teacher therapist differences. So, yes. I think I learned a lot because I found that even though I tend to be what we call a sensory seeker, I need movement. As you can see, I can hardly sit, I'm moving. I had to be careful because I'm sitting on a chair that everything, I'm either sitting on a chair or a ball because that does help me to attend. But I had to, through starting to think about the sensory preferences of the teachers, I realized that there's some teachers, you go in their classroom and there's tons going on and they have multitaskings and little group and they're hugging and all that you would go in there in a certain way and might say, hey, you might want to try a therapy ball for this child to sit at their desk. But if you go into a classroom and you notice everything is all very organized, then you might not do it that way. You need to sort of honor, just like we honor our children and their sensory preferences, we need to honor the teacher's sensory preferences. Or when I go into a parent's home, I wouldn't go in there and say, there's too much going on here. This painting that you have on the wall, you need to move it this way. You got to take it. Yeah. Or do that with a teacher, well, there's too much here. You need to take off stuff. You have to really understand this is their space and it's about, them feeling comfortable, you creating a space for them to feel comfortable to then have a conversation about what's possible. And that's true with the tips also. The quick tips are made so that they are attached to each of the SPM items, but for each item you have lots of tips that will meet different goals. And so you as a teacher, as a therapist, as a parent, come together to really decide what will work for me and my classroom with my child, not only with the student, but knowing that there's all these other students with little sensory needs themselves. What will work well in this environment? What can I do? Versus sort of what we did as therapists a long time ago, the medical model of just walking in and saying, here's a list of things to do. We just evaluated, he has this, and this problem, do this.
Oh yeah. That's the biggest way to get them to run for the hills. Gail, are you here with us? Can I hear you?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, so I think it's a great time as we're talking about the classroom and this will be like we're doing a podcast.
Great.
From a visual to a podcast with Gail, but you're here and Gail, tell us about how you're using SPM and quick tips in the schools, and is it part of the RTI or your MTSS framework? Those of you, we in education, we love our acronyms. So, we're not taking seriously unless we have an acronym. So RTI, response to intervention, and MTSS, multiple tiers of system support. So it depends. Some states use RTI and some use MTSS. They're basically all the same for those of you new to it. In tiered intervention, you're looking at what do we do with the whole class, the whole school, in tier 1. And then as those percentages of students are still having challenges and we move into tier 2, so what do we do in our smaller groups? And if those children still aren't responding as well to that intervention, then they move into tier 3. And we're monitoring and we're measuring all the way. So take it away, Gail.
Well, thank you. First of all, I am so glad to be here with you guys. I'm sorry you're not able to see me, but I'm glad you're able to hear me. We are using it in Fulton County in numerous fashions. First and foremost, I feel like we're using it as a teaching tool. So whether I'm using it when I'm presenting the information at a team meeting and actually able to show the pictorial of where the child is having their impacts. So it's a really nice way to explain what's going on with the child and for the entire team to have a better understanding. I've had general education art teachers and music teachers. They're so very happy to have an opportunity to share what they're seeing in their environment. So we use it to help teach the team, to also give them a voice for them to be able to communicate back and forth on various strategies and things that are working for them. So like I said earlier, maybe in the art room, they picked a couple of different tips from the quick tips to use in their area, but the teacher in the classroom is having a hard time integrating the tips she thought of. And so with the collaboration and the team approach and education, they're working together and sharing stories of success. And so it seems like it brings that team together. We're also using the SPM when it comes to the RTI process. So sometimes when they've tried a few strategies, they're really struggling, they may get a request for an occupational therapy evaluation from the parent, and we'll go ahead and do the evaluation and share some strategies and different tips. And sometimes those are just the things that change the course of the child's program and their success within the classroom.
Right. You know, I wanted to give an example. You know, we all have our little kids and case studies. So I had this one little boy who, when we did the SPM, the one of the things that's different about the SPM compared to other sensory checklists, so to speak, is that we wanted to follow Dr. Jean Ayres, who's the guru of sensory integration back in the 60s, follow her framework, which is looking at sensory systems. So it's divided into separate sensory systems, which I think is easier for people to understand. Oh, you're saying there's something going on with the visual system or the auditory system. So this little boy, it turns out, was he was very active and seemed to be a behavior problem, you know, those kids, right? And on the SPM, it's broken down into sensory systems, and it also looks at what we call social participation, which are the behavioral issues. And so it actually has a graph. And if you see that all the items that the child has difficulty with is only in social participation, but all the sensory systems are in the typical range, then you could say, I think that there's something going on and this little boy really needs help, but it's not sensory based. So we wanted a test that would also show when it's not. With this little boy, he definitely had items in the social participation area that were challenging, for sure. But he also, in the auditory system, had a lot of difficulty with processing and responding, etc. And so what was looked at initially as, you know, he's just ignoring us, we came to realize through the SPM that he really wasn't processing auditory. And what we found is that when you have a sensory system that doesn't work very well for you, you tend to ignore it even more. So it wasn't useful for him. So what would happen is that when the one class that he was really successful in was in art. He was great in art, except when it was time to go. And when she would say it's time to clean up, he would look like he was ignoring her. So once we met and we all talked about this, what she came up with this idea of making a stop sign, because visually, he's very visually. That's why art was great for him. So she came up with making a stop sign. And so when it was time to end, she would say it's time to end. And then she would flash her stop sign. And immediately he got it. Well, when we were having our team meeting and she was saying, you know, it's working really well for me, guess what? All the other teachers started using that same technique, a stop sign for him. Now that doesn't work across the board, but that's an example.
Well, but I bet there were a lot of other students in that classroom who was really happy to have a stop sign. I know my son with his auditory stuff would have loved a teacher to say, stop, turn in your homework. Is all on the bottom of his backpack all through high school, you know, because he never knew when it was time to turn it in. He wasn't processing that information. Exactly. And we had a visual strategy, Linda Hodgson, on our last month. And we were talking about how important the adding that visual to the auditory. And I think we all learn better that way. And I think that's something too to take away from this, is that we do these special things for these certain children, but it's good teaching.
It's good teaching.
It's good teaching for many, many of the students.
That's right.
So Gail, tell me a little bit more about how you feel the SPM and Quick Tips are supporting your families. I know you're so passionate. I need to introduce you, Gail, because I didn't have a chance. So I just want to take a break, and I just want to read her intro.
And
so
before you do, I just want to say one thing.
Yeah.
So, when I was in New York at one point, there was an art exhibit, and John Lennon, from the Beatles, John Lennon and Yoko Ono had these empty flower pots as an exhibit. And underneath that, it said, "Imagine the flowers." So now as Deb talks about this wonderful, beautiful woman, imagine our friend Gail.
There you go. And we're going to talk about if we can get you on camera. And I know, Gail, people are going to want to follow up probably with both of you. They probably want to spend 5 hours with you today, but we don't have that kind of time. But these are timed, and then we have a limited time that they allow us to, in order to have time to process the recording. So Dr. Gail Lindsay, she is originally from Boston, Massachusetts. She currently lives in the Atlanta area. She has over 30 years of experience as an occupational therapist, with the last 12 years in the school-based setting. Currently, Gail is the lead OT for one of the largest school systems in the metro Atlanta area. She enjoys engaging in the research process and has helped her department research the effectiveness of the use of SPM Quick Tips to achieve classroom goals. Her passion is working with families, teachers, students, and other professionals to understand the importance of working together to address decision-making regarding sensory needs. So that's the formal intro, Gail.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yesterday at our pre-interview, I could just see your passion around the collaboration piece. And I think, I'd like to talk a little bit about that and how the SPM and the Quick Tips that you're using has really helped you with that, with families and teachers and the families.
Definitely. Well, my passion is connecting the team together. And when I'm able to send the SPM form to the parents, it gives them voice as well. And when we sit at the meeting and we're all talking about the results and explaining maybe the difference between what they're seeing in the home environment versus what we're seeing in the school environment, it kind of connects things together. I found my family members are much more communicative. They'll tell us what's going on at home, or if the child is starting to feel ill, or if they're not sleeping well at night. We're finding out and teasing out so much more information to give us a better understanding of how to approach that child. I am very fortunate to have some great relationships with the parents that I work with. And I think it's because we communicate back and forth and we get to know their child together. Another huge aspect, I'm fortunate. I mean, I am in an inner city school, but I'm really fortunate to work with some great teachers, and they also are able to add the various tips and structures to their substitute forms. So instead of just thinking about what should you do with my class as far as math and reading and science if I'm taking a day off, but also who should be carrying the crate for the headphones, and where should Johnny stand in line. So it helps with the child being successful, even when there are alternative adults in that setting. So I think, at least in the schools that I've been working in, it has really enhanced the team. And instead of having different substitutes all year long, we find we get the same substitutes coming back over and over again because they come into a classroom that is well organized and they're successful in that classroom. And again,
that's great.
Our children.
Yeah, that's a great point, was with the substitutes and keeping that, class organized and not go into chaos when the substitute walks in. The question I get a lot with SPM and other assessments and OTs, PTs, support staff in general, is when do they come in? So at what point, what we find, and we talked about it a little bit yesterday at our pre-interview, was that we tend to wait a little too long. Like we don't send that form home until tier 3, when we could have done so much in tier 1 and saved so much frustration along the way for everybody. So can you talk about where your OT services are within a tiered framework and what your role is, and at what point do the forms go home?
As soon as we're brought in, we start sending the forms home, we develop the strategies, we start talking together. As long as we have consent.
When are you brought in, at what tier?
As soon as the teacher identifies that they feel like there is a sensory need or even a motor need. And that's another aspect. When they ask for an occupational therapy evaluation, even during the RTI or the MTSS process, we're not just evaluating that one component, we're evaluating the entire child. Because sometimes there may be a motor component, but there may be a sensory reason or a sensory impact on performance. And if we're able to integrate strategies, that child might be more successful. So we're both working in the RTI process or the MTSS process, as well as if they are evaluated through the special ed department and become a student on the special ed program.
You must have a lot of therapists. I run into a lot of
56 therapists.
Pardon me?
We have about 56 therapists.
Yeah, because I think one of the things that the therapists are concerned about is if they get brought into RTI. I was actually up in Alaska and this came up. It was I hadn't even thought about it when I was doing my training. They said, well, RTI Tier 1 teachers should be handling that. Like at some point, we would be too overwhelmed because we travel far and there aren't a lot of therapists and we have too many schools that we couldn't just pop in and observe and help at Tier 1. And there was a sense of that they didn't belong on the RTI process until Tier 3 when you're kind of at that one-on-one. How do you address that feeling up if you got too many referrals going out? After a while, you guys are all sort of overwhelmed. How do you address that?
Well, I think the first thing is the misnomer that if you get involved, you're going to increase your caseload. I think it's just the opposite. I think if you're effective and targeted, you give strategies, and the child maybe doesn't need direct service, but instead needs interventions where they work, play, and live. So I think it's just the opposite. I think that if you get involved early and if you have a great evaluation system like the SPM, you're giving strategies and you're giving tips that can be easily integrated and sustained within that environment. And then it doesn't necessarily need ongoing intervention from an occupational therapist. So I think we're trying to look at it a little bit differently than maybe we've looked at it in the past.
Yes, that's a very different perspective. Diana.
Yeah, so I just wanted to piggyback on that, and we kind of touched upon this yesterday too. A large part of my work, because I've worked in both very small rural school districts here in Arizona, as well as large inner city school districts in Phoenix, and where we had one OT to 100 schools, right? Initially, I mean, I've been here for a while, but that's how we started. And one of the most important thing was to be able to educate the administration. So I know Gail has a really strong administrative support. I've seen it, and she's done a great job with that. And I think I always tell therapists, your job description, look at your job description, all of you, go back and look at it. Was it written back in 1976, when we had a medical model? Or is it written in 2018 where we really understand the value of the OT services, also including that of in-servicing and educating, not just teachers and parents, but the administrators. So I always, the beginning of the school year, set up to meet with when the school principals and the superintendents usually get together once a month in most school districts, or maybe not as often as that anymore, but pretty often, and get on that agenda. And then on that agenda, talk about OT services, best practice in 2018, which include that of doing some in-servicing for all the staff, doing in-servicing for these administrators, explaining to them that if you can help the principals really understand what OTs do, in terms of what Gail was just explaining, that you could do it as a screening, or we could have early intervention teams in some of the districts, or what are they, child study teams, the OTBN on that, the OTBN on the staff meetings, as well as participate in research project. We do data-driven intervention, and this is part of what my interest in the quick tips has been, is showing data-driven intervention, that we're not just guessing, that there really is, that we start from data to then make some suggestions, and then we don't just drop it at that. We follow up using, there's a form in the quick tips, which is called the quick tips record form, to see, to help people, teachers and parents, jot down which strategies they've used and how often. So you can go back and say 3 months later, or whenever you do your reassessment, or check in and say, how's it going? And if they say, well, not great, and you notice they haven't done anything on the form versus, you know, it's not great, I've been doing this and it's not working. So then we have to reassess. So anyway, helping the administration really understand what OTs do, because I think a lot of them, if they haven't had a good back and forth dialogues with the OTs, it's more of in their head, you know, you're coming in to fix this child. And so administration is really important, educating administrators.
Yeah, and one of the things I teased out in my doctoral research, I did collaboration. I looked at a study that the collaboration between occupational therapists and general ed teachers. The one thing that really stood out was that administration support. And the most interesting thing is the administrators who were special ed teachers prior were much more likely to understand what OTs do and much more likely to support the collaborative process we're talking about here today. But if they were from a gen ed background or didn't have their own child with special needs and hadn't been familiar, or you know, they were not familiar with OT, that needed a little more educating. There was a little bit, you'd get a little more pushback. And I wanted to ask both of you, and we're almost at an hour already, which is amazing. But I wanted to ask both of you, another concern I get is contract OTs that are contracted and not hourly, and they're not employees. So they aren't invited to staff meetings. They aren't paid to go to these additional things. They are paid for that one child through, the Medicare money or whatever. There's like, this child gets this services. And I think that's where, in a lot of the places I've been working with, there's a lot of contract OTs. And I think, how do we educate administration to pay for like training and the things you're talking about instead of that one-on-one? What does that look like? Or have you seen examples of where the contract employees are able to be more, and they don't feel very successful at their job a lot of the times. They feel like they just work with one and they have so many other referrals they can't even get to because they're, so what's your thoughts on that?
Again, going back to the OT job description. So when you have a contract, what's happened is that your boss, whoever that is for the company that you contract that under, who has made this contract with the school district, has a contract, but you as the contractee don't get to actually usually see what that is. So it's to go back to that person that you're hired under to say, let me look at what my job description is, and let me educate to you what is 2018 OT services, which includes the education. And that's really why I have part of the quick tips be related to educating. So for example, I had a referral for a little preschooler who was having a lot of trouble at recess. And again, I wasn't an employee of the school, but what we did is we looked at the fact that the recess aide really didn't have very good knowledge about a lot of things. And what she was doing is to get kids' attention, she would take a spray bottle and spray it in their faces when she would want their attention. Well, it doesn't work great for typical kids, but certainly not for this little guy, and he would get into trouble. So as a team, we decided that the very first OT services was to educate the entire school, to do in-service for the entire school. This was a small preschool. Yes. To get the whole school on board before we even started doing anything. So
that's so interesting. That's such an interesting, I had never thought to, thank you so much, Diana, for that. When I get asked that question at my trainings, I didn't realize that they had a contract that's spelled out. It's a bigger document. You have to look at that document. And I'm working with a particular organization right now that contracts out, and we have these really open conversations around how to implement some of this stuff with this contract. I think, and I'm going to talk with her about that. I'm going to say, what does your contract say that you're actually doing with the schools? And that probably needs to be expanded or changed or, tweaked to represent what OT looks like in 2018.
Right. And the other piece is about medical, Medicare, Medicaid, all of that, yes, there are some that pay in that way, but you have to remember administrators in schools who make these contracts that school-based OT is based on IDEA, and IDEA is not the medical, it is school-based, it's educational related. And so that contract between that organization and the school district needs to include those things for OT services.
Gail, you want to add?
Yes, I just wanted to add to that because we do have some really good contracted OTs that work in our system, but there are two things that I wanted to say. We try to make sure that they're educated and it's seamless. They're expected to go to all the IEPs. They're expected to do trainings with the staff. So the same beginning of the year training that I do with the teachers on sensory, and I go over the sensory processing measure and how important these tools are to give us information. Our contracted people give the same in-services as well. So that's the first piece of it. And I would hope that most school systems would be able to treat all of their therapists the same, because depending on the school the child is at, it's not their fault that they have either a contracted or a direct hire. They should get the same level of service no matter who their therapist is. The second thing is my boss is wonderful. She's a speech language pathologist, and she brings myself and my co-lead and the PT in on the contracting. And so we actually look at the companies we're working with to make sure that they have other supports for their contracted staff as far as education, competency. And so, as Diana said, there are the contracts that the OTs have with their companies, but there are also contracts that the schools have with the contracting companies, and the school systems need to make sure that they're holding that contract to a certain level. So we're not bringing in therapists from certain companies that aren't doing ongoing education with their clinicians and support for their clinicians.
Wow, that's powerful stuff.
Yeah.
Great. You know, this is all about think differently. You guys just, whoa, you just shifted. I get this question all the time, and I don't know how to answer it. The contract, well, we can't do this. The contract, they're always like, we can't do this, we can't do that. So this is really wonderful. And those of you on the call too, I don't know about any of you, but it's really shifted my thinking, and that's what this is all about. And we are, you know, at that hour point, it went by so quickly. And look at those questions, Diana and Gail, they're stacking up. So you ready to answer some questions?
Yeah, I just want to say one more thing before people get off, if that's possible, because I know people probably will get off. And that is that, so thankful for all of you again. But I wanted to just mention the SPM2, because I kind of threw that out there and didn't explain it. I did say that it's infants all the way through adults. And so we already have piloted them, and the responses have been so great. And we are in the middle of data collection. So as a follow-up, I know that Deb is going to send a link that if you're interested in collecting and helping us collect data, and so that means infants, toddlers, we still have some elementary and preschool, but we also have teens and adults. You'll be able to get on the link, and it's through the publishing company, and just a 5-minute question answer. If they think that you would qualify, then you could do some data collection on whatever age group you want, and you get paid for it. So we really need you, and hopefully it'll be a win-win situation, because we want to get this tool out as soon as possible. We've been working on it since 2012, and it's going to be great. We have several forms. So I did mention the infant has both the infant caregiver form. The teen has a self report. It has a parent report and has a teacher report, and a driving form also for kids that are driving. And so you'll be able to, again, because all of these forms were given to that same person. So that child's, that teen's teacher, that teen's parent, as well as the teen filled out the form, and that's part of the standardization. Anyway, so that's the teen, and then the adult has the adult form, and then what we call the Informant Report. Haven't figured out if that's going to be the name, but basically, if you have a partner in life, right now I'm working with a couple like that. It's really been fun. Can tell more about it later. Or if you have an adult with developmental disabilities, then the caregiver would fill out as the informant on that person. So anyway, I just wanted to bring that out. We are going to be presenting at AOTA in Utah. For any of you OTs coming to Utah, please come and see us at our conference on the SPM2, and we'll also be at the WPS booth. So just wanted to put a little plug in, because we really need your help in data collection, as well as the quick tips if you want to help with those.
Yeah, we're a great community. We'll get on it. We're going to help you out with it. And Diana, we're talking about teens, and Diana and Gail both were marched with their local high schools for the gun control when all the students were going out and sharing their voice. And what Diana, Gail, and I were talking about in our pre-interview yesterday, and me, I probably have about 10 years of teaching with teens with special need, not special needs, but I call the bottom quarter, the ones that are struggling with reading. They're ninth grade, they're reading at first, second, third grade level. And I've done a lot of teaching where they're in the gangs and they're self-medicating and they're using drugs. And it's always been my personal perspective that we've missed something and that there's some underlying sensory processing issues that are associated with the behaviors I was seeing with these students. So I'm really thrilled to see the teen form. And a part of me feels like it should be a self-assessment done on all high school students. When they get into ninth grade, they have a health class, and they call it different names. I taught high school biology and I taught the health classes, so they go by different names. But had I had that, every student would be filling it out so they understood what was going on and possibly could find, alternatives to ways to calm instead of smoking pot, or ways to get revved up instead of like all the coffee they drink. The teachers, after lunch, our kids were crazy. After lunch is when they're just so hyped up on caffeine, can't even get them to focus, even the typical students. So I think that you're just so right on track, Diana, with looking at that population. And it's really been missing in the research. And also, for me as a reading specialist, as we're doing more and more legislation around dyslexia, and we're supposed to have somebody trained on staff with dyslexia, and we're supposed to be able to screen for it. My personal opinion is that if we're screening for dyslexia, you better have that SPM right next to the students, because so many of those behaviors overlap, and dyslexia can look worse because of some sensory processing issues. It's been my experience of all my years as a reading specialist. So I feel like I want to put that out to everybody too, that if you are starting to do screening for dyslexia in your schools, and like in Oregon, it's all this legislation, all the teachers have to be trained. Get them on this call, let them watch this interview, and get them more familiar with the SPM. A friend of mine's granddaughter went to a really expensive clinic, was diagnosed with dyslexia and ADHD, and there was absolutely no sensory processing evaluation done. And we know, I look at her and I can tell.
Right.
When I'm around her, I'm like, she needs to see an OT. But so that's a gap that I see over and over again. That's sort of my little bandwagon with these interviews, is to say we must look at the whole child, and sensory processing is what's running that whole system, and it's affecting and could very much have an effect on how dyslexia looks, and also executive functioning looks. That's a new big buzzword. But underlying executive functioning is always you've got your sensory processing system. And if that's disorganized, that executive functioning can look disorganized. Right. So that's all I have to say about that.
No, but just to piggyback on that, when we developed the SPM for teens, we had many different clinicians that reviewed our forms before we even went into piloting. And we had a whole group of mental health experts, social workers, psychologists, as well as therapists. And we really believe that, and of course, there isn't just one tool for everything, and not everything is everything, but we are sensory beings. And so we do believe that some of these sensory processing challenges can be precursors for mental health disorders in the future. And then just to finish off, I mentioned I'm working with this adult couple. He was diagnosed with Asperger's, high functioning Asperger's, and he thinks everything is fine, except that he's fallen in love with this wonderful woman, which we're calling Anita. That's not really her name, but Anita. And he thinks it's all her fault. And so anyway, he was referred to me, and so I brought them together. Make a long story short, they each filled out the form on each other and on themselves. And now they're so excited about, they're building their new home of where they're going to live after they get married. And, they're going to change the lighting because she's sensitive to certain kinds of light. He likes to have fluorescent lights or not. And the touch, he thinks that she's always so needing for touch, but she's like craving touch. And they've really started to have a conversation. And that was one thing that Anita said to me. She said, I think all people should have the sensory processing measure before they get married. So
I absolutely agree. Gail, did you have any last thoughts to wrap up before we start answering questions? And just so everybody on the call knows, we do, I have a 2-hour max, so there'll be, it will end. So I'm going to try to end it on if there's a lot of questions left, we don't get to them, I'm going to send you some options. We have a discussion network called Mighty Bell, and Diana's a part of that discussion network. There's a lot of other ways we can keep continuing to talk after this. So Gail, some final thoughts, and then we'll go to questions.
Some final thoughts for me are, I am like Deb, I think the SPM is almost the best thing since sliced bread. But I think that sometimes people don't use it in its entirety. So sometimes they may just use the classroom form and not get the home form out. Or they may do the home form in the classroom form, but they don't use the environmental forms. This is a great tool to get to see how that child's day unfolds. It gives you a lot of perspective about which areas may be affecting the next area. As well as if you link it with the quick tips, you can continue to adjust and update the report and the various tips they're using. So if you are using the SPM, I just encourage you to use it in its fullest because it'll give you a wealth of knowledge. And that would be my parting comment.
That's a really good point, Gail. Thank you.